In the vast expanse of the galaxy, far beyond the reaches of Earth, there existed a test unlike any other. It was known to few but feared by many, the 100-year survival course. Designed by the ancient alien race called the Varnak, this course was intended to measure the strength, intelligence, and endurance of species across the cosmos. The Varnak were the oldest known civilization, and they held power over countless worlds. They believed in a strict hierarchy, judging who was worthy of joining the Council of Ancient Minds, an alliance that held the secrets to the universe. To enter this council, a species had to survive the 100-year survival course, a test of ultimate endurance. For millennia, no one had succeeded. The course was nearly impossible. There were 12 different zones, each filled with treacherous challenges: blistering deserts, frozen wastes, deadly jungles, toxic landscapes, gravity storms, and mental traps that twisted the very minds of those who attempted them. It was said that those who failed didn't just die. They became something far worse, lost to madness or worse, turned to stone by the ancient traps. When humans, a young and seemingly fragile species, applied to take the test, the Varnak laughed. They were too weak, too emotional, too unpredictable. But the humans were insistent. They had a fire in their eyes, something that sparked a curiosity even in the hearts of the cold, logical Varnak. They were allowed to enter, but not with the expectation of success. The Varnak would watch, expecting them to fail within hours. The test began. As the humans crossed the threshold, they were greeted by the first zone, a vast desert of endless sand, a landscape that had broken even the strongest of minds. Here, the sun beat down relentlessly, and every step seemed to sap the energy from those who attempted the course. The air was thick with heat, and the temperature could melt even the hardiest of creatures. The humans, however, didn't flinch. They moved as a unit, adapting quickly to the environment. They didn't waste energy fighting the sun. Instead, they dug into the sand, finding a cave of sorts beneath the surface where they could rest and gather their strength. The Varnak observed in silence. This was not normal. Other species would have panicked by now, wasting valuable energy and time. But the humans had a different kind of strength, one that the Varnak couldn't quite understand. Their unity, their calmness in the face of danger. It was something new, something that had never been seen in a species before. As the humans ventured deeper into the desert, they encountered the second challenge, the gravity storm, the violent, chaotic phenomenon that altered the gravitational field in unpredictable ways, causing objects to float or crash violently to the ground. It was a deadly force, one that had crushed entire teams. The humans, however, remained focused. They used the gravity fluctuations to their advantage, navigating the storm with a combination of quick thinking and precise teamwork. Their adaptability was remarkable, and with every step, they seemed to grow stronger, more determined. The Varnak were puzzled. How were these fragile beings surviving the impossible? In the vast history of the course, no one had ever lasted this long. Yet these humans were not just surviving. They were thriving. Their resolve was unwavering, their connection to each other unbreakable. It was as though they had tapped into something far beyond physical strength, a force that the Varnak could not comprehend. As the humans moved into the jungle zone, the challenges grew more mental than physical. The jungle was alive with danger, venomous creatures, dangerous plants, and illusions that distorted reality. The Varnak had placed hidden traps to test the minds of those who attempted this zone. Most species had fallen victim to the mental maze, losing themselves in the nightmarish visions that awaited them. But the humans did not lose hope. They communicated in ways that the Varnak found strange, using not just words but emotions, bonds, and a sense of purpose that transcended fear. The illusions failed to disorient them. Instead, they shared their stories, their memories, and their strength. They trusted each other completely. One of the humans, a historian named Leah, found something peculiar in the jungle, an old stone tablet half buried in the dirt. It was engraved with strange symbols that resembled ancient human writing. The markings seemed to glow faintly, and as Leah touched them, a strange energy pulsed through her body. The tablet was an artifact, and it connected with her DNA in a way that none of the Varnak had anticipated. The humans were not just a random species. They were tied to the test in ways that the Varnak had forgotten. The ancient builders of the course had hidden the truth of this test, and Leah had uncovered a key that the Varnak had long since lost. The discovery rocked the very foundations of the Varnak's understanding of the course. The test was not just a measure of survival. It was a calling. The humans were meant to take it. They were a part of an ancient legacy that had been scattered across the galaxy, hidden in plain sight. Their very DNA was intertwined with the test, and in completing it, they were unlocking something far greater than mere survival. They were unlocking the secrets of the universe itself. With this knowledge, the humans pressed forward into the final zones, where the challenges became more intense and strange. The tests grew harder, but the humans were not afraid. They understood now that they were not just fighting to survive. They were fighting for something greater. They were fighting to prove their worth, not just to the Varnak, but to themselves. As the 24-hour mark approached, the humans reached the final challenge. An ancient AI that had been programmed to test the essence of a species. It asked the humans a question that no one else had been able to answer. What is the purpose of your species? The humans did not hesitate. They answered with one word: survival. The AI analyzed their response, and for the first time in the history of the test, the ancient machines acknowledged the humans. Their response was not just about survival in the physical sense, but about surviving together, enduring through hardship, and growing stronger in the face of impossible odds. It was this spirit that had allowed them to conquer the course in just 24 hours. The Varnak, witnessing the human triumph, were left in awe. For the first time in millennia, they realized that the humans were more than just a species. They were a force of nature, unstoppable and united. They had completed the course in a fraction of the time, and in doing so, they had rewritten the rules of survival in the galaxy. In that moment, the Varnak knew one thing for certain: humanity would never be underestimated again. The vast desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a place where the scorching sun burned down mercilessly. It was the first zone of the 100-year survival course, and the humans had just entered. To them, it felt like an impossible dream. A test that no one had ever survived, a course designed by an ancient alien race known as the Varnak. The Varnak were known for their cold intelligence, for their ability to design challenges that had crushed entire civilizations. And now, the humans were here. They had come, not with arrogance or fear, but with a quiet confidence that bewildered the Varnak. The humans, 12 in total, stood together in the middle of the vast sandscape, the heat immediately pressing in on them. Their bodies burned with the heat of the sun, the air thick with dust. They were exhausted even before they began, but they had no choice but to move. Each step they took sank them deeper into the shifting sands. The Varnak had watched other species attempt the test before, and they had failed miserably within hours. Those who could endure the heat would be destroyed by the next challenge. It was always the same. But the humans were different. They didn't panic. They didn't stumble or falter. They began to move with purpose, their movements synchronized, working as a single unit. One of them, a man named James, looked up at the sky, scanning it with sharp eyes. "We need shelter," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The sun's too strong to keep moving in this heat." Without waiting for a response, he began to dig into the sand, creating a shallow pit where they could hide. The others followed, working quickly, using their collective knowledge to create a small refuge from the brutal rays. The Varnak watched from their high-tech observation posts, utterly perplexed. Most species, faced with such extreme conditions, would panic, use their energy foolishly, or collapse under the pressure. But these humans, they were thinking ahead. They were. It wasn't just their physical endurance that confused the Varnak. It was the way the humans worked together. They communicated silently, with gestures and glances, as if they had always known how to function as one. It was like they were a single organism, each part moving in perfect harmony with the other. It was something that the Varnak had never seen before, and it intrigued them deeply. For hours, the humans rested in their makeshift shelter, waiting for the worst of the sun to pass. They drank sparingly from their water supplies, each sip carefully rationed. When the heat finally began to subside, they gathered their things and began to move again, picking their way across the desert with precision. But it wasn't long before the next challenge emerged. A fierce sandstorm began to swirl on the horizon, the wind picking up and sending waves of sand into the air. The Varnak knew that this was a natural part of the desert zone, a test designed to break the will of any species foolish enough to take it on. The sandstorm was fierce, and most species would have been thrown into a panic. They would have run in circles, confused, lost. The storm would disorient them, make them weak, and they would be forced to retreat. The humans, however, did not run. They stopped in their tracks, each of them moving deliberately to a position that would give them the best chance of surviving. The sandstorm rushed at them, but instead of fighting it, they embraced it. They crouched low to the ground, their bodies staying as close to the earth as possible, using the storm to shield them. They did not struggle against the wind. They worked with it. One of the humans, a woman named Sarah, shouted above the roar of the storm, "Follow my lead," she called, her voice steady and commanding. She began to move, guiding the group forward in a way that seemed almost unnatural. The storm howled around them, but they moved as if they knew exactly where to go, as if the storm itself was their ally. They used the howling winds to mask their movements, hiding from any dangers that might be watching. It was a strategy that no one had anticipated. The Varnak were stunned. They had designed the storm to overwhelm, to break the spirits of any who entered the test. And yet, the humans were moving through it with a calmness that was almost unnatural. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving. They were turning the storm into an advantage. Hours passed. The storm slowly began to weaken, its fury spent. But the humans did not slow down. They continued forward, determined to reach the next zone. The Varnak, watching from their high-tech posts, were silent. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. This was impossible. It wasn't just that the humans had endured the storm. They had mastered it. They had turned it into something they could use. It was as though the storm had no power over them at all. The humans reached the edge of the desert zone as the first rays of dawn began to break. The sand underfoot was cooler now, and the air was less oppressive. They had done it. They had survived the most brutal challenge in the entire course, and they had done it in a fraction of the time that any other species would have taken. But even more astounding than their success was the way they did it. They weren't just surviving. They were learning, adapting, evolving with each passing minute. Every challenge they faced, they turned it into an opportunity. Every obstacle became a stepping stone. They weren't just following the rules of survival. They were rewriting them. The Varnak, who had watched this unfold with growing disbelief, now faced a dilemma. These humans were more than just resilient. They were dangerous. They didn't just pass tests. They changed the nature of the test itself. It was in this moment that the Varnak realized something. They had underestimated the humans. They had thought them weak, fragile, and unworthy of the test. But they had failed to see the most important thing about humanity, their unshakable will to survive, to adapt, and to learn. This was not a species that would bend to the will of others. This was a species that would shape the future, no matter what the cost. As the humans moved into the next zone, the Varnak could only watch in silence. They had entered the course expecting failure, but now they were beginning to fear what would happen when the humans completed it. They had opened a door, and they didn't know if they could ever close it again. The air was thick with tension as the humans entered the second challenge of the 100-year survival course, a labyrinth of endless corridors and shifting walls. Unlike the harsh desert or the deadly sandstorm, this challenge was one that tested the mind, not the body. It was an ancient maze, created by the Varnak to break the spirits of any who dared to venture into it. Legends had it that no species had ever passed through this maze, for it wasn't simply a physical space, it was a psychological nightmare. The walls seemed to shift when you weren't looking, and every corner you turned might lead to a dead end, or worse, a trap. But the humans were different. As soon as they stepped inside, the maze doors closed behind them with a deafening thud. The group froze, the sound echoing through the cold, sterile walls of the maze. A deep voice, mechanical and dispassionate, filled the air. "Welcome, participants, to the mental maze. To pass through, you must solve the puzzle hidden within the code of your own minds. Fail, and you will never leave." The words seemed to hang in the air like a heavy weight, each syllable laced with an ominous warning. The Varnak watched from their high-tech observation posts, fascinated by the humans' reaction. Most species would panic at the thought of such an immense challenge. They would retreat, trying to escape the overwhelming pressure, but the humans didn't seem afraid. They stood quietly for a moment, eyes scanning their surroundings, as if they were calculating their next move. James, the leader of the group, was the first to break the silence. "We need to stick together," he said, his voice steady and calm. "Stay close, and don't let the maze separate us." The others nodded in agreement, forming a tight circle as they began to move deeper into the maze. At first, the walls seemed unremarkable, just stone and metal stretching endlessly in all directions. But as they ventured further, the maze began to reveal its true nature. The corridors grew tighter, and the floor seemed to shift beneath their feet. It was as if the maze was alive, watching them, listening to their every step. Then, without warning, the walls in front of them shifted, revealing a new path. It was different from the rest, more vibrant, as if it had been designed to lead them somewhere important. But the moment they took a step forward, the air became thick, as if something was pressing down on them. Their thoughts grew heavier, slower, and the atmosphere in the maze felt almost suffocating. The group continued to move forward, but the deeper they went, the more disoriented they became. It wasn't the maze itself that was causing this. They could still see and touch the walls. It was something inside them, something that began to tug at the edges of their minds. Each person began to feel it. Flashes of memories that weren't their own, voices whispering from the shadows, doubts creeping in. Sarah, who had been walking alongside James, suddenly stopped. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. James turned to look at her, his face calm, but his eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. "I heard something," he admitted, "but stay focused. It's part of the test. The maze is trying to break us." The whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a storm. Each of them began to see strange, unsettling images, visions of failure, loss, and despair. For some, it was memories of loved ones lost. For others, it was fears of never being good enough, never accomplishing their goals. The maze seemed to be probing their deepest insecurities, trying to unravel the very fabric of their minds. But it was Sarah who had the worst vision. She saw herself standing alone, surrounded by darkness, her body frozen in place, unable to move. The vision was so vivid, so real, that it took all her strength to shake it off. But when she opened her eyes, she realized that the maze was not just messing with their minds. It was offering them a way out. The walls shifted again, but this time, there was no choice. They had no way to go back. "James, we can't keep going like this," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "It's too much. It's making us lose our minds." James looked around at the group. They were all struggling now, each person battling their own internal demons. But there was one thing he had learned about humans. They never gave up. "Listen to me," he said, his voice cutting through the mental fog. "This maze doesn't control us. We control it. We can't let it make us doubt ourselves. We know who we are. We know what we can do. And we will not stop until we find the end." It was a powerful statement, and for a moment, it felt like the maze itself hesitated, as if it were waiting for the humans to break. But the humans didn't. Slowly, one by one, they began to shake off the visions, focusing on their strength as a team. They weren't just fighting the maze, they were fighting the psychological traps it had set, and they were winning. As they moved deeper into the maze, the walls began to shift again. This time, there was a door, simple and unadorned, yet it seemed to glow with an unnatural light. The door didn't have a handle, but they could feel its presence, as if it was meant for them to open. The group gathered around it, each person uncertain of what lay beyond. The maze had thrown everything it could at them, but they had passed every test. James took a deep breath and placed his hand on the door. For a moment, nothing happened. The others stood silently, watching. And then, as if by magic, the door opened. The maze had been defeated. But as they stepped through the threshold, they found themselves not in a new corridor, but in a vast chamber, dimly lit by strange, shifting lights. It was a place that seemed both ancient and futuristic, a space untouched by time. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal, and on that pedestal lay an ancient device, an alien artifact, designed long ago by the Varnak. "This is it," James said quietly, stepping forward. "This is the key to the next challenge, the code we need to unlock." But the moment he touched the device, the walls of the chamber began to shift once more, and a deep rumbling sound filled the air. The maze wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The Varnak, watching from their observation posts, were stunned. They had never seen anyone survive the maze, let alone solve its psychological puzzles. The humans had done it. They had unlocked something deeper, something that no one had even known existed. And now, the real challenge was just beginning. The deep, rumbling silence of the alien world echoed in the hearts of the humans. Their feet crunched softly over the ancient soil of the desolate planet, where time seemed to stand still. They had traveled far across galaxies, seeking answers, hoping to uncover the hidden truth behind the mysterious artifact they had discovered. Yet the closer they came to their destination, the more questions arose in their minds. The stars above seemed to watch them, their light cold and distant, as if aware of the dangerous secrets that lay ahead. The group, led by Captain James, had been trained for everything: combat, survival, diplomacy. But nothing had prepared them for the enormity of what they were about to face. The planet they stood on had once been the home of a great and ancient civilization, the elders who had vanished without a trace centuries ago. Legends spoke of their incredible power, their knowledge far beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. But those who dared to search for them had never returned. And now, the humans were walking straight into the heart of that forgotten world, unaware of the hidden dangers that waited. As they ventured deeper into the planet's forgotten cities, the air grew thicker, charged with an eerie energy that seemed to resonate in their bones. The landscape was barren, with ruins of once grand buildings scattered like skeletons, their surfaces covered in moss and strange, glowing symbols. The walls of the ancient structures seemed to pulse, as if alive, their secrets just out of reach. It was as though the planet itself had been waiting for them, waiting for someone to uncover what had been buried in its depths for so long. James halted suddenly, raising a hand to signal the team. "Stay alert," he murmured. "We're not alone here." The others, once eager and confident, now felt the weight of his words. They exchanged uneasy glances, each person sensing the unseen presence that seemed to follow them, as if the planet itself were watching. Their footsteps grew softer, as if to avoid awakening something ancient and deadly. They soon found the entrance they were searching for, an enormous door built into the side of a mountain. It was covered in intricate carvings, faded with age but still beautiful. The symbols, unlike anything they had ever seen, seemed to pulse with a faint glow, as if holding a secret just beneath the surface. At the center of the door was a large, oval-shaped gem, dark, almost black, but with a strange, shifting light that seemed to call to them. Sarah, one of the team's top engineers, stepped forward, her fingers brushing the stone. "This looks like a puzzle," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. "If we can decipher the code, it might open." James nodded. "We've come this far. Let's see if we can figure it out." The team set to work, trying different combinations of symbols and pressing certain patterns in the stone. Hours passed, and the tension in the air grew thicker. It wasn't just the puzzle that was getting to them. It was the eerie sense that time itself was stretching out, like they were trapped in some kind of endless loop. Every attempt to solve the puzzle seemed to lead to more questions than answers. Then, as if by chance, Sarah placed her hand over the central gem. A flash of light erupted from the stone, blinding them all for a moment. When the light faded, the door began to open slowly, revealing a narrow passageway that led deep into the mountain. The air inside was cold and stale, filled with the scent of old stone and forgotten history. "This is it," James whispered. "Let's move." They entered the passage one by one, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The passage was long and winding, its walls lined with strange carvings that seemed to change when they weren't looking. As they advanced, the weight of the place pressed down on them. The feeling of being watched never left, and each corner they turned seemed to lead them deeper into the unknown. The walls narrowed until they found themselves standing before a massive chamber. Inside the chamber stood a pedestal, and upon it rested an object, a small box made of an unknown, gleaming material. It hummed softly, as if alive. Surrounding the pedestal were more carvings, these more detailed, showing scenes of the elders, figures of immense power, their faces solemn and wise. But there was one image that caught James' eye. An elder kneeling before the box, their face twisted in agony. "What does it mean?" Sarah murmured, stepping closer to examine the carvings. "I don't know," James said, his voice thick with caution. "But whatever is in that box, it's important. We need to figure out what happened here." As they approached the pedestal, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their lights for a brief moment. When the lights returned, a figure stood before them. A tall, slender being, its skin pale and luminous. It was unlike anything they had seen before, a manifestation of the elders themselves, though it was not alive. The figure simply stood, watching them with eyes that glowed faintly, its gaze filled with a deep, eternal sorrow. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Then, in a voice that seemed to resonate in their minds rather than their ears, the figure spoke. "Do you seek the truth?" The humans froze. It wasn't a question, but a command. The weight of the words settled heavily on their shoulders, and for the first time, they realized the gravity of their journey. They had come seeking answers, but the answers they were about to uncover might not be the ones they wanted. James stepped forward. "We do. We need to know what happened to the elders." The figure's gaze darkened. "The truth you seek is buried in time, hidden from all who would dare to find it. The elders paid a price for their knowledge, a price too great to bear." With a swift motion, the figure raised its hand, and the pedestal before them began to glow. Slowly, the box lifted into the air, the light from within pulsing like a heartbeat. The figure spoke again, its voice a mere whisper in the wind. "The knowledge you seek is yours to claim. But beware, the path forward will cost you more than you can imagine." Before anyone could respond, the figure vanished, leaving only the eerie silence behind. The pedestal, too, faded, and the box floated gently into James' hands. His fingers trembled as he held it, unsure of what to do next. As the box opened, a rush of ancient memories and knowledge flooded his mind. He saw the fall of the elders, the terrible cost of their quest for ultimate knowledge. Their thirst for power had led them to open a door they couldn't close, unleashing a force that had destroyed their civilization. The memories faded as quickly as they had come, leaving James standing there, breathless. He turned to the others, his face pale. "We've uncovered the truth," he said quietly. "But now we must decide. Will we continue this path, knowing what it will cost us?" The weight of the decision hung heavily in the air, and for the first time since they had set foot on the planet, the humans realized that the true test had just begun. Whatever secrets were buried in time, they were now theirs to claim, and the consequences of that knowledge could change everything. The final hour was upon them, and the planet, once cold and lifeless, now seemed to pulse with energy. James stood at the edge of the ancient chamber, staring at the box that had opened before him. It was as though time had stopped altogether. The knowledge and memories that had flooded his mind only moments before had shaken him to his core. He could feel something inside him shifting, as if the very air was charged with a new kind of power. His heart raced, and every breath felt heavier, as if the weight of everything they had uncovered was pressing down on him. His team, once full of confidence, now stood in tense silence. The truth was out there, but it was more than any of them had bargained for. The elders, the once mighty civilization, had fallen into ruin not because of a war or a natural disaster, but because of their hunger for knowledge. They had unlocked something far greater than themselves, a power that no one should ever possess. And now, it was theirs. "What now, Captain?" Sarah's voice broke the silence, a mix of fear and curiosity in her tone. "What do we do with all this?" She glanced nervously at the open box in James' hands, as if it held the fate of the universe itself. James turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. His mind was racing. They had come to this planet seeking answers to the mystery of the elders, but what they had uncovered was more than just history. It was a force, a power unlike anything humanity had ever known. The energy that had surged into him from the box still lingered, crackling in his veins. He felt stronger, more aware, as if the boundaries of his mind and body had expanded. "I don't know," he replied quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision they now faced. "But whatever happens next, we need to be prepared. We're not just uncovering the past, we're unlocking the future." The others exchanged uneasy glances, each person feeling the growing tension in the air. The chamber around them seemed to close in, as if the walls themselves were watching them. The strange symbols that had adorned the planet's surface earlier now seemed to flicker, alive with an energy that resonated in their bones. This place, this world, was more than just a tomb for a lost civilization. It was a vault, holding secrets that could reshape the very fabric of reality. "We can't just walk away from this," said Marcus, the team's medical officer. "If this is really what I think it is, we've just stumbled upon something that could change everything. But how do we control it? How do we even begin to understand what we found?" James looked down at the box again. The once lifeless object now hummed with a strange, quiet intensity. He could feel the pulse of energy radiating from it, and as his fingers hovered over its surface, he understood. The power within was not something to be wielded lightly. It was an ancient force, one that had destroyed the elders in their pursuit of control. But now it was in their hands, and with it, the potential for greatness or destruction was unimaginable. "We need to find out more," James said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "We need to understand how this works. We can't let this power fall into the wrong hands, and we can't let it corrupt us either." Sarah nodded, her face a mixture of determination and fear. "If we're going to use this, we need to be sure of what we're doing. If we make a mistake, it could be worse than anything we can imagine." As the team gathered around him, the weight of their discovery began to settle in. This wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a key to a future they couldn't yet comprehend. The elders had sought to master this power, but in the end, it had consumed them. Now, it was their turn. The planet, once forgotten and abandoned, had become a battleground of its own, a place where the past and the future collided in ways no one could have predicted. What if we're not meant to control it? Marcus asked, his voice tinged with doubt. What if we're just meant to learn from it? To walk away and let it fade into history, like the elders did? We don't have that luxury, James replied, his voice firm. We've come too far. We have to make a choice. The power is here, and it's up to us to decide what to do with it. If we leave it, someone else will find it, and they won't hesitate to use it. The tension in the air grew thicker as the team struggled with the enormity of the decision before them. Could they truly control such power, or were they doomed to repeat the mistakes of the elders? Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, followed by a flash of light that sent everyone stumbling back. The box in James' hands trembled, as if alive. It glowed brighter, and the energy within it surged, pushing against the walls of the chamber. It was as though the planet itself was reacting to the human's presence, recognizing that the secret it had held for centuries was about to be unleashed once again. The light intensified, flooding the room with an unnatural brilliance. James felt the power surge within him, filling every fiber of his being with strength. But it wasn't just physical strength. It was a mental clarity, a sudden understanding of the universe's deepest secrets. It was as though the veil between worlds had been lifted, and he could see the very threads of reality itself. Time seemed to stretch and bend around him, and for a brief moment, he understood everything. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. The chamber returned to its eerie silence. James stood there, breathless, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt different. The world around him felt different. His mind, once limited by human boundaries, had expanded in ways he could never have imagined. "Did you feel that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. James didn't answer right away. He was still trying to comprehend the flood of knowledge and power that had washed over him. He could feel the energy still coursing through him, and he knew that he was no longer the same person he had been just an hour ago. "We've changed," he said finally, his voice quiet but filled with a new certainty. "And so has everything else. We can't go back to the way things were. The future is different now." As the team stood in the chamber, they realized that they were no longer just explorers. They were the bearers of a new kind of power, one that had the potential to reshape the universe itself. But with that power came a burden. The weight of their choices, the knowledge that they held in their hands the fate of countless worlds. The 24th hour had passed, and in its wake, the future had changed forever.